So we're excited to be one of your first of many, I'm assuming, fireside chats, panels, talks, whatever. You guys are up to a lot of things. So for those who don't know, let's give them the kind of five-minute version or less of Draper University, and where you guys are, where you've come from, what you guys provide, and then what you're doing in the enterprise space, and then also what you're doing with the new fund.
Yeah. So Draper University is a 7-week entrepreneurship program based in San Mateo for 18 to 30-year-olds. It's not your traditional accelerator where they're focused on week-over-week growth. What they're really trying to do is catalyze the entrepreneurial spirit. So find people that think that they want to be an entrepreneur and put them through tests and challenges and provide resources that allow them to find that entrepreneurial spirit and that mindset that will allow them to succeed.
How many of you have heard of Draper University, just by curiosity? How many of you first time you've heard of it? It's a fascinating thing. I remember years. When did it start? It was like 4 years ago.
2014, I believe.
And you were one of the first graduates.
Yeah, I was in one of the first cohorts.
And they do stuff. There's like 8 buckets, right? Like I remember one of them specifically is like survival skills.
Yeah.
So they don't just teach you how to pitch and how to code, and they've got like people like Elon Musk and all these amazing people that come and talk. But what's it like to go through as a student? And then let's talk about what you've now done to kind of bring that up market to enterprise and some other things. So I think that's actually really interesting, given where we are with blockchain and everything else.
Yeah, so again, we're not that traditional accelerator where they're focused on week-over-week growth. It's that changing of the mindset. So the first week, what we do is we help people think a little bit bigger. It's 80% international. And so people are coming in with very local problems that they're trying to solve, and we get them to see things differently, see something bigger. My co-founder right now, for example, came in with a small logistics company, and then he saw what the blockchain could do for his emerging market, and he disappeared for a week. Just dove in and started to think really big about how this stuff could change his country. And so that's part of it. And then we get through leadership challenges. So as you mentioned, survival, what we do is we bring the entrepreneurs up to Northern California for 4 days, and we put them through leadership challenges that are run by Army Rangers, SEAL Team 6 guys, and these people that have gone through very difficult challenges, and we put them in high stress situations that force people to work together so that you can start to understand your leadership style. So you can start to see what happens when you face adversity and how you handle that. So again, it's really about changing that mindset to allow them to succeed once they leave, giving them that tool set.
That's awesome. And I'm messaging quiet in the back. Hey guys in the bar, can we keep it to a whisper back there? No, just I'm getting the pickup, and I want to make sure that everybody hears. So that's kind of what you've been doing. And then Draper was, everyone knows Tim Draper, and Steve Jurvetson's going to be here shortly. And but they were one of the early people to really go heavy in institutional rounds of blockchain-related companies and even Bitcoin. That DNA, how have you guys now tried to take some of that pattern recognition, that experimentation, those wins, those losses, and what are you doing with enterprise leaders specifically, and what are some of the things you've learned as you've rolled out this new initiative?
Yeah, so we are really focused on helping people understand where the real opportunities are. Again, thinking big. There's a lot of industries where people look at them and they say, maybe we shouldn't go tackle that. And Tim really loves going after monopolies. So where there is 1 or 2 players in a really big space that's very entrenched and hasn't really changed, he loves investing in that. And I think that's what he saw initially when he found the blockchain and Bitcoin in particular. So he was one of the really early investors in some companies like Coinbase and others that have really grown and started to take on those entrenched industries. Mm-hmm. And so when he saw Bitcoin, he was really excited about it. He predicted the 10,000 price point back in 2014. Everyone kind of laughed at him then. No one really accepted it. They thought he's a very eccentric individual calling this out, and he was right. He nailed it. It came right to 10,000 when he said it was going to happen. So he loves going after those entrenched industries. And so what we're doing on the enterprise side right now is we are running a blockchain intensive for enterprise and industry. And the goal is to help these individuals understand the technology and how it's going to change their industry so that they can be the leaders of that change. Because if you are a leader of industry that's not innovating, you're not going to be leading. You need to understand this technology. You don't need to necessarily have a blockchain solution today, but what you need is a strategy in order to implement it and help lead the industry.
Well, and I think we've been talking a lot today about, just blockchain implementation as not even necessarily the right question to ask, right? What is the business model that I need to do to become viable the next 3 to 5 years? And when you really start to think about the business model that is going to have orders of magnitude savings of cost or correspondence time, Then you quickly arrive at blockchain, either in its current or a future iteration, as we've seen several different options today that again, are great spaghetti being thrown on this wall. What we have to realize is that if we can change our business model, then this can become very applicable, and it's really the best technology and the only one we can to support that new change of business model. But if we don't change the business model, then we're probably wasting a lot of time and money, no matter what we call it. And so as you're working with enterprise leaders, what's the difference between working with middle manager, VP and above, C-level types, entrepreneurial-fying them? That's not a word, but I just made it up. What's the word we're looking for? Making a more entrepreneurial tendency.
Yeah.
And as you're doing that, what are the difference or the similarities between that and the 18 to 35-year-old kind of founder set that you started with at Draper University?
So what I would say is that a lot of the enterprise companies, when they first come in, the first thing that they want to do is apply the technology in the way that they've always operated, right? Competition. The best example of this is the financial industry and what they did with R3. Traditionally, the financial industry is very proprietary. They see something, they want to own that information, they want to own that solution, and they want to compete with everyone. But what we've noticed and what they had was competition allowed you to move very fast. But now collaboration is allowing you to go further. So what you have to do is teach them to be entrepreneurs within their organization, so intrapreneurs, and drive collaboration with their industry. I think that's one of the biggest things.
I love what you just said, and probably because I'm biased to it, but that's one worth writing down. Competition has allowed you to go faster, but collaboration allows you to go further. I think that's a really a nugget for today, to just get people's brains to start to think about this differently. That was brilliant. So talking about the funds, what are you guys doing? Because there's several different funds.
Yep.
Obviously, each fund has a theme. There's a new one. There's something new you guys are doing in the sovereign space. I know there's certain things you can't talk about, certain things you will, but like shift gears, talk about that a little bit. What else are you guys doing?
Yeah, so Draper University has been investing in the startups that have coming through, as well as all Draper Associates rather has been investing in the space very heavily and broadly, and then they invest in some of the startups that come through. Funding is not guaranteed at Draper University, but there's a lot of really great companies that have been founded there and have gone on to launch. And usually it's not the ones that thrive in those 6 weeks, but the ones that stick with it and they come back. So what they're launching is a Draper University specific fund to invest in the alumni of the university. Because there are great companies like Data Wallet, for example. They started out as a company that wanted to monetize likes on Facebook and that kind of information. But then they saw how the blockchain could enable them to capture more information, allow people to own that information and sell that information. And so they recently did a really large crowd sale. This is 3 years after they went through the university. So they're setting up this fund specific to invest in companies that have come through. So again, I'm an alumni, and so what we're doing with these emerging markets is not necessarily through Draper University, but because we had gone through Draper University. So I'm recently the co-founder of Ledger Atlas and the CEO of Ledger Atlas, and what we recognize is that there are 3 significant problems in the blockchain space. Right now, regulations are going to stifle innovation. These regulations exist to address risks inherent in markets, models, and for consumer protection. And this technology is fundamentally changing those risks, so regulations will have to catch up and change as well. And that's going to take time. The second is that this technology is not software as a service like traditional software as a service, where I sell to one company and they get the full service of this, and then you sell to another one and they get the full benefit, and then the third. You almost need an industry-wide implementation of a solution to allow those companies to, again, work together to go further.
Yep.
And then the third is that the technology can't yet handle the scale that the healthcare industry would require, that the finance industry would require. So what we saw was there's an opportunity for emerging markets to be the first movers. Mm-hmm. So Ledger Atlas recently created a special economic zone in a country I can't yet name. And the goal is to help these emerging markets use the blockchain as a catalyst for innovation as well as economic development. And so what we're going to be doing is formalizing the best practices of initial coin offerings to promote ICOs as a fundraising, go-to-market, and growth strategy, while simultaneously providing consumer protections.
So let's share your bias, or share what your research or your application of these. Why can emerging markets do it better? What's your opinion? And this is Jack's opinion, but what is your opinion, because you've been on the front line of it, why they're not here faster?
There's 2 things. One is that we have a patchwork of innovation. We have been at the forefront of innovation for so long in the United States that what we have is an evolution of technologies building on each other. So we have these legacy systems that the blockchain needs to find its place within, right? But if you go to an emerging market where they don't have an established infrastructure, it no longer needs to be intertwined into what is going on. You can start from scratch. The best example of it is in Africa, they didn't go from no phones to landlines to cell phones. They went no phones to cell phones, right? So now with this technology, to smartphones, right away to smartphones. And it's really incredible what that has done. And this is that next wave for things like healthcare, like finance and insurance, and for the government issuing bonds and other things like that. A lot of that is still paper-based. So this is the first opportunity to really lead innovation and promote economic development within our country.
That's a great answer. I think it is.
Thank you.
I don't know if they think it is. I think it is. I think, at World Tokenomic Forum, one of the things that we're doing with our mission is to really try and figure out what is the conversation, who are the players that need to be involved, how do you create a new table, right?
Yeah.
When certain countries haven't had access to have a seat at the quote unquote table. Well, now there's been a new table being built, right?
Yeah.
So how do you organize and invite? So it's inclusively exclusive in the sense of who can we have here, because we're going to have 9 billion people on this rock whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
They're mostly going to live in cities, 60% of them more than likely. And that means rethinking a lot of stuff we've talked about today, from mobility to the on-street experience to everything in between, how food gets made, how it gets grown.
Yeah.
And we also have what I call the opportunity age, which is this opportunity where now 4 billion people that have been under $2 a day, 2.5 billion unbanked, have a $1,000 device, or at least a second generation. It was 1,000, now it's 300.
Yeah.
Bottom line is it has more access to info than the president had 15 years ago, and they went from a hut with maybe no running water to a prosumer tribuducer, which is my made-up word,
I like that
right?
one.
Where they can
you say that one
literally
again?
consume prosumer tribuducer.
I like that.
So they can consume, they can produce, they can distribute, they can do all of it
Yeah.
in the power of their hands, but we have to educate them.
Yeah.
Right? And not only that, we have to educate the companies on how do you transact with these people? What do these people need? How do you localize that need?
Yeah.
Right? Because how do you localize the content to message that need? So there's this amazing lift of new problems and new opportunities to sell. And as we take, and I'm being long-winded with my question because I want you to just react to this. As we take 300 million plus Americans that are a consumer-driven economy that is roughly 2/3 of our GDP, and we look at the debt load we've put on the bottom 60% and the unsustainability of that, our only hope, my opinion, is that we figure out a way to activate those 4 billion.
Yeah.
Because if we're an enterprise and we can't activate those 4 billion, next couple of years is going to be rough.
Yeah.
So how are you dealing with the person whose job every day is to go figure that out when they're inside this behemoth, whether they're here or in Europe, and say, good, here's how we can make you better? Because I think that's your value prop, but I want to know how you actually do that. That's a big problem.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that, again, you don't need a blockchain solution today because it's probably not ready to be implemented on a large scale, especially if you're a Fortune 500 company and you have a responsibility to not fail, right? You can't fail.
Every 90 days, you get to check in on that opportunity. Am I failing or not?
And you have to be right. So what we're seeing is that this technology is truly disruptive. And I know that's a buzzword, don't kill me. But when people say disruptive, they mean that they're going to take a market share of something. But that's not true disruption theory. So what true disruption theory states is that an incumbent has a target market, right? And they ignore all other markets along that access. And so what happens is someone comes along and they look at one of the long tails and they say, we're going to solve a problem over here. We're going to create a new solution or a new network that solves this problem. And then they move along the long tail and provide a better solution and ultimately displace the incumbent in their target market.
Perfect example, banks.
Perfect. And so what we're going to see is the emerging markets are that long tail. So these solutions are going to be implemented. When you talk about the debt that we've unloaded on them, right now emerging markets, for example, in Brazil, the cost of debt is 300%. So if we can solve a debt issue in Brazil with a solution based on the blockchain, it will eventually come back into the United States. So it's going to move through the emerging markets and then come back into developed countries where we are going to have to be slower to regulate, because what the individual was saying before is we can't fail the American people, right? But these emerging markets have to succeed. That's a fundamentally different mindset.
Well, I would caveat that. I think it was the right comment, but I would say we can fail the American people.
Well, it's a possibility.
We don't want to.
It's a possibility.
But we could.
Yeah.
If we don't wrap. So I think, the little bit I know, I think if I was a regulator right now, I'd be taking, what is it, a 4-day?
It's a 4-day blockchain event, yeah.
So if I was a regulator right now, or if I was, as a taxpayer, I would go, I want every regulator that I fund, which is Arizona and the federal government, to have to take a 4-day course before they regulate anything. Because at least they'll be smarter about the implications, the unintended consequences.
And it's different for those regulators, right? Like, they need to think about and fit these new regulations into a bit of a framework that already exists, right? And they need to intimately understand the blockchain in order to do that, understand the risks that are inherent in this new technology and the solution. So you're absolutely right. I think they should all take the course.
Are we cool to take some questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we gave you guys enough to talk about, right? Like, throw some questions at them. We've got them here. Let's figure out what's on your mind.
My first introduction to Bitcoin was when I was going to Argentina. And someone said, you're going to Argentina, this is a crime. What is happening in the Argentina space? I believe Bitpagos came out of Draper.
What was it?
Bitpagos?
I believe that they are, but I'm not intimately familiar with the company.
So what is happening in that space, in that type of economic environment?
So is the question about, like, in environments like Argentina where a currency's been debased, what is happening? So I mean, we can vamp on that a little bit. You want to?
You
go
look
first?
like you're ready for this one.
No, I don't know if I'm ready for it. I think I'm not ready for it. In full disclosure, what I think it's uncovering is something that, and I'll be bold enough to say, in America we don't think could happen. And why I say that is because for the last 100 some odd years, right, we've dominated. And for those of you who have not read the book, The Fourth Turning, you really need to read the book, The Fourth Turning. It came out in 1997. It was written by William Strauss and Neil Howe. And it talks about the cyclical natures of history. And every other culture except for American culture, who's been around thousands of years, ours has been around about 240 or whatever it's been now, it knows this, right? Winter, spring, summer, and fall. And what it's important is that there's 4 cycles that last 20 to 25 years. There's a thing called a seculum they talk about. It's 100 years. And we're all born during one, right? So there's people that were born during the financial crisis of '08. Our son, for instance, right? He was born in 2011, but he was born on the back of that. So when you're born during a certain time, you grow up during a certain time, and then you become a leader or start something. And depending on what's happening around us, we take on a generational archetype. Well, we right now, fast forward, and you can read the 300-page book. Fast forward, we are in the crisis period. We entered it around 2005. The last time we were in it was in 1940. It ended 1945, April specifically, because we had a chance to push a third bomb and now kill more people than the war had killed that we started to fight against, right? So we were going in to stop genocide, but now we could actually cause more deaths than we came in to stop. And we had to make a decision. Are we going to be the aggressor to stop this war, or are we going to stop and hope that the Japanese give up thousands of years of dishonor before surrender, which was a paradigm they had? So two countries, 2 global societies at the peak of a crisis period had to get to a point where they dropped what they knew and said, okay, this is not what we want to do. We're all going to go off a cliff. And thank God they did.
Yeah.
And so we will come to that again. So I think the point is that what's happening in Argentina, my long way of running around your question, but answering maybe a different version of that question, is that what we're seeing capital flight to cryptos because it's their digital gold. It's their actual money. Now, it may not be a store of value by other people's definition, but in Argentina it is, right? And at some point, it or something like it could be for all of us. And so I think it's an indicator that says, what happens when the US dollar debases? What happens when the Federal Reserve can't sustain 20 trillion and then another 10 trillion? What happens then? Because the answer most people have is it's not going to happen, or they ignore it. And the reality is it's going to happen. We just don't know when. So that's my...
So I'll try to keep it a little short.
Yeah, do that. I'm running this thing. I can talk as long as I want.
You go and go and go. So I think what we're seeing is it's the classic battle of incumbent versus startup right now. And these smaller governments are starting to look more like startups where you have to solve a problem. And the problem in these smaller markets like Argentina and Venezuela and these other nations is more significant than it is in the United States. We'll be creating efficiencies here if we ever issue a digital currency backed by the US government, but they're solving a necessity there.
Right.
And so I think that they're going to continue to push the way. And I think that some are going to fail. Some of these challenges are going to fail, but they don't have a better solution right now. So they need to go through that process to take the chance. And then these other countries are going to be able to step back, see what worked, and then start to iterate on that and use those solutions. So
that's a better answer. The emerging markets are really the leader because, like you said, it is a necessity there.
And they're agile. I mean, we're going to have to be very... we're going to have to move with intention and responsibility here in the United States. We need to make sure that we're doing it right every single step of the way. But these other countries are really small, and they have the ability to pass laws much quicker, and they have the ability to solve these problems a little bit differently. And I think that the biggest catalyst of this is going to be the blockchain community itself. we are going to start funding the projects that are solving problems in these markets. And we're going to start being, it's almost like blockchain versus the world, right? We are going to start going to these countries that are supporting our community. And that's one of the things that I think is going to be most exciting. I think that the blockchain community can really start to develop some of these emerging markets, and I'm really excited to see that happen.
I agree with you, and I think it is exciting. I think we got to remember this is exciting, right? This is the kind of problems we want to have. This is what all of us in this room, if you're attracted to something, are built for, right?
But we're so impatient. That's the issue.
Yeah, we're impatient, but I'm getting fired up just listening to you. Who's got another question? We've got about 2 more questions.
So, like you were saying, right, waiting for emerging markets to catch up to enterprises in the U.S., right? And you said we're too big to fail, or we've already failed, given the shareholders and a lot of examples. So, but if we kept waiting for, won't we always keep playing catch up? So, what as a community or as a consortium, is there any plan to?
So I kind of think of this as there's a first mover disadvantage. Sorry, that's not the right one. There's an innovation complacency, right? Like you push innovation so far that you become comfortable with the solutions that you've created, and you sit on those for a long time, right? And I think that's kind of where we were at in the United States. Before the blockchain, a lot of the pitches I saw in Silicon Valley were all iterations on other solutions. There was nothing truly groundbreaking or revolutionary. And I think that it comes down to the fact that we innovated so much that we created efficiencies that we're now comfortable. So I think that these real problems are going to get solved in other locations, and the delta is going to be more significant there, but the solution is going to be similar, and then we're going to bring those back in. So I don't know that we've failed the American people. I don't believe that we have. I don't think we're anywhere close to that. But I do think that there is room for growth, but the room for growth is not as significant as it will be in some of these emerging markets, and they're going to be more agile in it as well.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know that I think we failed the American people either, but I do think that we could. And I think that what you're getting at is, the analogy I would use is, if you build a house, this is a great house, right? We're fortunate enough to have this Draper house for the next 3 days, and it's been a delight having the content here. But is it the perfect layout for what we want to do, right? And so I think if I think about it just in layman's terms, I go, America's built this amazing economy. We've innovated to the point where we're so efficient. But what we cannot do is think that the living room belongs there still, right? Like, what if we ripped it down to the studs because we still have time? We don't have to take away the studs. The frame is there. So what we're at right now, I think, is that time where we think about regulation right, we think about these things right, we could figure out what we could rip out, gut this thing without taking it down, and then build it the way it needs to be built with all the knowledge and efficiencies we already have to lead again.
Yeah.
We have that window now, so we haven't failed yet. Now, if we wait too long, right, we could. But I think what will happen is an emerging market, we'll figure it out and say, this is what the new flow of a house looks like, and we could still recover.
Yeah.
And I hope that's what happens, because I think that serves the world. I think that serves everybody. But yeah, that's how I put it in layman's terms. One more question? Yes.
Okay, just out of curiosity, it seems also too that there's a bit of a geopolitical play as well. So say for example, countries like Singapore, South Korea, Japan, they're regulatory friendly with regards to blockchain, Bitcoin, and other technology, whatever. So are these countries more or less serving indirectly or inadvertently as test, let's say, use cases with regards to taking the best practices of one country and then adopting it to a country like the U.S., in which
I think the biggest question between some of these countries is whether or not deregulation is going to increase their GDP or cause more of a capital outflow.
Right.
So South Korea being friendly is more about allowing just having a taxation model rather than doing like a mining ban in China.
So
the problem with that is, say for example, let's say if I'm a blockchain entrepreneur and I feel as if the regulatory framework in the U.S. is not as, let's say, beneficial to me, let's say compared to like Singapore, then I would basically set up shop and my business Singapore, and then that might move towards that.
yeah, so I think like what we were talking about earlier with the enterprises, the leaders of industry that don't innovate will no longer lead. We're going to see that again with governments. You started to see it. Different countries are regulating the ICOs or the solutions differently. And those that create a framework that supports the innovation is where all the blockchain technology is going to move. And there's not really right now, there's not enough high quality solutions for them to be dispersed globally. So where you create a framework that supports what people are trying to work on in that innovation is where people are going to move. And then you're going to start to see people copying and pasting and saying this was the best practice for this didn't work from here, and we'll grab these regulations from there and kind of bring them back. But there is a significant first mover advantage for the governments to be supportive of this technology right now.
And I liked how you picked this up. So I'm going to kind of come on your side of the question. First of all, great question. I think it's one that we have to stay in the question for a while on and not just rush to the answer. But I think you've got a couple dynamics, right? One is the opportunistic country that can take the risk, can lead, or just quite frankly wants to be treated significantly, right? Which does all that geopolitical stuff. And then you got a country like U.S. or you got the EU. You got some things where there is something to lose, where there is like, well, let's maybe wait and see. The capital flight thing, I think, I think is a big one, right? Because if you're in a country where you can be patient and you can wait, you don't necessarily have the risk of your dollar being debased into Bitcoin or something like that, then you don't have to rush to go hammer down regulation. But if you're also in a country like the U.S. where you have a lot of people that are investing in this stuff or think they're investing when they're speculating, because you can't invest in a cryptocurrency, it's a ledger balance, but you can speculate in it. When you have that, you do have to start to protect, because you have to protect the entrepreneurial community too, right? We don't want the scam stuff. We don't want that to get to the point where it nukes the underlying chance for us to experiment and get some of this stuff sorted out. So there is a balance, and I think the question is, what is the incentive of country A, country B, country C? What kind of country are we? Like, what are our risks? What are our rewards? And then as an entrepreneur, I mean, you're going to want to operate in all of them. You know, so I think you got to make a decision that allows you to get to market with the least tail risk, and at the same time, you don't want to shut your mind off and go, oh, the U.S. is like, that's not going to be the case. You're going to do business here, and you're going to want to be able to do business here. So if you have to start somewhere else, okay, great, but like, don't divorce yourself from this on purpose, or any country, quite frankly. You know, that'd be my 2 cents.
So just to round up for me. We're working on finding that balance. So if you guys want to talk about it, I'll be here for the afternoon and more than happy to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, where's the best place for them to find out information about, the 4-day immersion or whatever it is? Just because we haven't talked about it. Is it just Draper U, or what is?
Yeah, go to draperuniversity.com. On the top tab, there's the Blockchain Executive Intensive program that we're designing. There's a lot of information there about it. We have incredible speakers coming through. I'm not just saying this because I helped design it. I truly believe that this is going to be some of the best content that's been curated, and it's going to walk through it in a very logical process from the 101 down to how would you include a token or do a token sale and what happens after. So please go to Draper University to check that out and to learn more about the entrepreneurship program as well. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks. Well, on behalf of everybody else, thanks. You flew in today for this, and we're excited. Thanks for coming out, and he'll be around for the happy hour and for the rest of the showcase and stuff too. And I think you're staying through maybe tomorrow. Yeah. But Jack, Saba, everybody, we're going to reset the stage. Give us about 5 or 10 minutes. We're going to bring Joel and Travis up for the Bad Crypto live broadcast. So grab a drink, grab something, and we'll be back in 5 or 10.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.